Good evening. Mound City Bar Association welcomes all of you, and I should also say Mound City Bar Foundation welcomes you and Judge Willie Epps to tonight's program. Judge Willie Epps Jr. serves as a U.S. Magistrate Judge for the Western District of Missouri and sits in Jefferson City. He is a graduate of St. Louis County Country Day School, Amherst College, and Harvard Law School. He began his legal career in service to our country as an Air Force judge advocate, special assistant U.S. attorney, and assistant special counsel for the Waco investigation. Later, he was named partner at 2 law firms and head of litigation at a financial services firm. Judge Epps is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, life member of Mound City Bar Association, and former MCBA treasurer. Thank you and welcome, Judge Willie Epps.
Good evening, Fawn. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I want to thank you as well as the Mound City Bar officers and the leaders of the foundation for having me speak this evening about a topic that's near and dear to me, and that's Black lawyers of Missouri. Fawn, can you see my PowerPoint presentation? I'm going to assume everyone can, so I will march through.
It is there. Thank you.
As we approach the Missouri bicentennial, the professional, political, and social standing of Black lawyers in Missouri has progressed. Black lawyers occupy numerous important prestigious positions throughout Missouri, including partners at our large law firms. And you see some of my favorite people here. I know some of you are on this evening. General counsel and executive officers of corporations and large companies. The circuit attorney in the city of St. Louis, a first. The prosecuting attorney in St. Louis County, a first. Mayor of Kansas City, actually the third. Executive director of the Missouri Bar, a first. And tenured professors at the 4 law schools across the state. A Black man currently presides as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Missouri, the second to do so. Black men and women hold 10 federal trial judgeships in total. 4 Blacks serve on the Missouri Court of Appeals and 19 on the state trial court. We even have 2 Black Kansas City trial lawyers who star in a nationally syndicated television show called Couples Court with the Cutlers. Even so, I think we all know this, Black lawyers across the nation have struggled mightily for equality, fairness, and opportunity, and remain unfortunately underrepresented in the profession. My Law Review article, forthcoming in the Missouri Law Review, focuses on that struggle in Missouri, where Black attorneys have challenged the legal system to live up to its promise of equal justice under the law. These inspiring individuals overcame widespread discrimination and oppression to gain admission to the bar, integrate law schools and bar associations, and advance the cause of civil rights for men and women in Missouri and beyond. Despite the monumental struggle of this state's Black attorneys, their stories and the stories of their allies remain largely untold. This forthcoming article attempts to shed further light on the important history of African Americans, principally here in the state of Missouri. I must thank, because I see law clerks who are on this VTC. I see many of you who have taken my calls late at night for a number of months or early in the morning. I see so many of you who have contributed to this project, and I just really cannot thank you enough. And this is literally a community effort, and I think we all know that. In a short hour, I want to give you a 30,000-foot overview of my research. We will briefly discuss the birth of Black lawyers in Missouri from 1871 to 1921. Next, we'll highlight some of the Black lawyers in the state between 1921 and 1971. Lastly, we'll touch on Black lawyers during my lifetime, and that's roughly from 1971 to today. There is no record of any Black lawyer anywhere in the United States in 1821 when Missouri became a state. But in the 1840s, with slavery still legal, several African Americans gained admission to various state bars. Macon Boland Allen, pictured to the left, the first known Black lawyer in the United States, passed the main bar examination in 1844. He was sponsored for admission by General Samuel Fessenden, an abolitionist and politician with what was then the largest law practice in Maine. Allen also was the first African American to be barred in Massachusetts in 1845. 2 years later, Robert Morris Sr., he's pictured there in the center, he became the second Black lawyer in the United States and actually the first to file a lawsuit. In 1850, John Mercer Langston, he's pictured to the far right, he became the first Black known to have applied to an American law school in New York State. He was denied admission because of his race. He also was rejected by another law school in the state of Ohio. In 1853, Langston served as an apprentice for Philemon Bliss, a white Ohio lawyer, publisher, and abolitionist, and was admitted to the bar the next year. Incidentally, in 1855, in a town just outside of Oberlin, Ohio, this gentleman was elected township clerk, becoming the nation's first Black elected official. On Thursday, December 7th, 1871, as far as we can tell, John H. Johnson likely became the first Black lawyer in Missouri. I apologize for not having a photo. I have looked high and low, but have been unable to locate. And if anyone on this VTC has a photograph, I would love to have it. He was admitted to the St. Louis bar on the motion of a white lawyer who drew a distinction between the political and social equality of Blacks. That is, at the time, some supported Blacks being admitted to the bar as a political right, but believed Blacks should never have the same social standing as whites. While many Blacks responded to anti-Black sentiment by leaving Missouri, Johnson chose to stay. As a matter of fact, he was active in an organization called the Colored Immigration Aid Society. That was a society that assisted countless Blacks to flee the South following the Civil War, including a ton of Blacks from Mississippi, from whence my family comes and where I was born. That organization helped a number of African Americans relocate to Kansas, among other states. His efforts to help African Americans, shockingly, can be found in U.S. Senate committee testimony. He testified before a special U.S. Senate committee in 1880 about the flight of Blacks from the South. And Johnson's Senate testimony is remarkable. It's an uncensored peek into history. The official transcript includes a racial identifier by the witness's name, John H. Johnson, colored. Obviously, there was no racial identifier for those who were white. Johnson explained he was an attorney at law, but worked at the Customs House in St. Louis. And perhaps that's a result of the challenges Missouri's first Black lawyer had in finding paying clients and maintaining a private practice. Johnson discussed the migration of African Americans from the South to the West as they trekked through St. Louis. He noted that these, quote, immigrants, and that's what they were called at the time, began arriving in the early 1879 period and continued as of the date of his testimony. In response to this crisis, Johnson and others helped provide food, clothing, shelter, and to get those folks to a part of the country that was so much better. Incidentally, he served as the treasurer of that organization. In 1877, Albert Burgess likely became Missouri's first Black lawyer to practice law full time. And he had a career that spanned 50 years. Near the end of his career, he sat down for an interview with a white reporter from the St. Louis Globe Democrat magazine in 1927, and it's illuminating. That's a copy of the actual article that ran. You note that the press and Burgess both thought that he was the first Black lawyer in St. Louis. And I think because of the work J. Clay Smith did, we know that Burgess was not the first. Burgess was raised in Detroit and graduated from high school in 1874. After high school, Burgess was accepted to the University of Michigan. He took 1 year in the regular academic department, and then he entered the law school of the university. Burgess stated that Michigan law then had only 4 law professors, if you can imagine, and 1 other Black in his graduating class. Burgess graduated from the law school in 1877 at age 20. He once remarked that he became a member of the bar because he became a member of the bar prior to being able to vote, because at the time the minimum voting age was 21. A few months later, he moved to St. Louis after hearing that a large number of Blacks sought lawyers of their own race. He arrived with very little money in his pocket, and he knew 1 other person. On New Year's Eve of 1877, Burgess passed the bar exam in Missouri and was admitted to practice law, opening his own practice and renting space in a 3-brick story building in downtown St. Louis. I've been unable to locate that building. If anyone has any information further, I would love to hear about it. Success did not come easy to Burgess, being the first to practice full-time. He had major financial difficulties. Clients were sparse. He once went 48 hours without eating. Burgess noted that many prospective Black clients were skeptical a Black man could handle the case to the best advantage, and he attributed those beliefs to prejudice. But despite being broke, Burgess refused to return home defeated, instead continuing to struggle along. And as he built his reputation, clients, interestingly, both white and Black, eventually came. Without question, he paved the way for other Black lawyers in St. Louis. He was the first Black man to serve as a prosecutor in a St. Louis court, and he was assistant city attorney for not 1 mayor, not 2 mayors, but for 3 mayors. Burgess also became active in the Colored Immigration Aid Society, filing its articles of incorporation in 1879. My favorite fact about him is he served as Mound City Bar Association's first treasurer, and that is the only executive post I ever had with Mound City Bar. So I like that fact about him. All of you WashU grads recognize this photograph. This is Walter Farmer, successful lawyer and effective activist. He spent most of his life in Missouri and Illinois. He was born in Brunswick, Missouri. He graduated with high honors from Lincoln University in Jefferson City in 1884. He then enrolled at Washington University School of Law. His classmates were not thrilled with his presence and tried to force him to quit. But at the urging of Dean William G. Hammond, Farmer persevered, becoming the first Black graduate of the law school in 1889. And to put that date in perspective, it would be 1968 before the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Law would have its first Black graduate. So in 1889, he walked across the stage. His classmates didn't want anything to do with him and would not walk with him. WashU graduates know the story. Dean Hammond walked with him. And Dean Hammond being a hero for that fine gesture. Farmer began practicing in St. Louis after his graduation, where he enjoyed a diverse practice covering all branches of law, including handling several major murder trials and probate cases. Only a year after obtaining his law degree, Farmer handled one such case called Duncan v. Missouri. At the first trial, the defendant was found guilty of first-degree murder, but Farmer persuaded a judge that a new trial was necessary. At the second trial, the defendant was again convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Undeterred and convinced of his client's innocence, Farmer appealed, becoming the first African-American to argue a case before the Supreme Court of Missouri in 1893. Receiving another unfavorable ruling, he became one of the first Blacks to argue before the Supreme Court of the United States. In 1900, Farmer became the first Black in Missouri to serve in a judicial capacity when Judge William Zacharist appointed him a special judge in the St. Louis Municipal Court. In 1905, Farmer departed St. Louis for Chicago to continue practicing law. There are so many amazing trailblazers in that initial period of the Law Review article from 1871 to 1921. But given we have 1 short hour and I know we have to end on time, I'm gonna move on to the second section of this paper, which deals with lawyers from 1921 to 1971. In 1921, Missouri celebrated its centennial. And during this early part of the 20th century, Black lawyers faced great challenges practicing law in Missouri courts. Many of these lawyers practiced with limited education, experience, skills, and often with limited resources. This is one of the more interesting facts I came across. James Endersby and Williams Horner discovered that even in late 1939, Charles Hamilton Houston, you all are extremely familiar with his work, but he's pictured there to the left, one of the greatest lawyers of the 20th century, needed books and information on court rules in Missouri in order to file an NAACP-sponsored civil rights case for damages in federal court. But his associated counsel in Missouri were sometimes of little help. He complained to Thurgood Marshall, pictured to the right, on October 18, 1939, quote, "I couldn't get the books and court rules. None of our lawyers had them either in St. Louis or Kansas City." Physical attacks on Black lawyers were rare, but not unheard of. In Missouri's Boot Hill, St. Louis attorney William A. Cole was beaten by a mob of angry whites for defending 4 African-American sharecroppers who were also threatened physically. The Missouri Supreme Court granted a writ of habeas corpus to bring the defendants to Jefferson City. Another Black lawyer and his client were confronted by lawless and hostile whites in mid-Missouri during the same time. Between 1900 and 1931, at least 17 Black men were lynched in Missouri. And during this period, economic opportunities for Black lawyers were limited. Whites would often not consider hiring a Black lawyer. So with a few exceptions, Black lawyers were limited to Black clients. And even then, some of the Blacks of means would pass over Black attorneys for white ones. And I know that still happens at times today. And these limited professional opportunities often meant Black lawyers had to support themselves outside the practice of law, much like John Johnson working in the customs house, sort of like the post office, instead of practicing law. These harsh challenges, however, did not deter a majority of this era's Black lawyers. Instead, they joined the front lines to fight against violence and oppression by organizing within the Black bar and filing lawsuits that led to substantive changes across the United States. By the way, in 1921, at the beginning of this period, Black lawyers numbered 950, or about 0.78, so less than 1% out of the nation's 122,000 lawyers. Most law schools at that time outright excluded Black law students. As I mentioned a moment ago, the University of Missouri, our flagship law school, wouldn't have a Black student until, well, the campus wouldn't have a Black student until 1950, and the law school would not have a Black graduate until 1968. Several states created vastly inferior Jim Crow law schools, like the Lincoln University School of Law in St. Louis, and that's pictured here. Southern states also witnessed substantial declines in Black attorneys at this time period, coinciding with the wider disenfranchisement, segregation, racism, violence experienced by Blacks under white-dominated Southern governments. George L. Vaughn, we're all familiar with that name, and many of us know the story, but he was born and raised in Kentucky. He graduated from Lane College and Walden University School of Law in Tennessee. He served as a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army during World War I. He relocated to St. Louis to practice law, becoming a leader in the NAACP and a vocal supporter of the anti-lynching movement. In 1919, Vaughn helped form the Citizen Liberty League to help recruit, mentor, and elect more African Americans to run for public office. 3 years later, he became our first, when I say our, he became the first president of Mound City Bar Association. Vaughn was also appointed Justice of the Peace for the 4th District of St. Louis in 1936. Vaughn is best known for his role in Shelley v. Kramer. That's the Supreme Court case that held the judicial enforcement of restrictive covenants as unconstitutional. Shelley, which originated in the city of St. Louis, is discussed at length in the Law Review article. The national spotlight shone again on Vaughn when, as an alternate delegate to to the 1948 Democratic Convention, he forcefully demanded the unseating of the Mississippi delegation and the adoption of a civil rights report. Sidney Redmond, some of you know him, others of you don't. He's perhaps, I think, the most unsung hero in Missouri civil rights history. He was born in Jackson, Mississippi, which is right down the street from Natchez, where I was born. He was the son of Mississippi's wealthiest Black man. That was not my case at all. He's a second generation African-American attorney. He was sent to Harvard University for both college and law school by his parents. St. Louis became home in 1929. Asked why he left Mississippi for Missouri, he's got some interesting answers. He said the opportunities in St. Louis were greater than they were in Jackson. And you just had more difficulty, he remembered saying, trying a case in Jackson and getting anything like what the case is worth. Said the juries did not look upon a Negro as being worth anything, and you couldn't have a good case. You could have a good case, and they would give you what they thought a Negro was worth. And he said at the time it was unheard of to have a Negro on the jury. So he said he heard that there was a large population of Blacks in St. Louis that were looking for Black attorneys, and he thought he ought to come north to try it. Yet he reports that St. Louis was not a paradise. He explained that while it was a tremendous improvement over Mississippi, Blacks in downtown St. Louis at the time still couldn't get a sandwich, couldn't drink out of the water fountains, couldn't go to the public bathrooms. Redmond once offered two stories by Silas E. Gardner, a Black friend who practiced law in Mississippi, to illustrate this point. He said to him, quote, "Mr. Gardner, I read a case of yours on a simple contract that went to the Supreme Court. How did that happen?" And he said, "That's an amusing thing. After I took it up to the court and got it reversed, I went back to the trial judge on another matter. And the trial judge said, 'Sir, how was it that you reversed me?' And he said, 'Judge, you didn't read my brief. I filed the same brief in the Mississippi Supreme Court I filed with you, but you just assumed I had no idea what the law was and you didn't read it.' And the judge told him, 'I guess you're right.'" His second story was just as egregious. Mr. Garner had an urgent matter and tried to get a hold of the Mississippi judge and called his house and got his wife and left a message. Said the next day, the judge called him back, and this is Judge Garland Lyle, called him back and said, "Sir, I heard you call me. Let me tell you this. If you have to call my house again, be sure to tell my wife that you are a nigger, because I don't want my wife calling any nigger Mr." And that was Redmond's impressions of Mississippi and happy to be in St. Louis. He's primarily known for the way he handled the Lloyd v. Gaines case. That's the case that held that separate but equal should be in effect. And if you don't want to admit Blacks to the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Law, you have to create a separate law school for Blacks. And paper talks more extensively about that, but I'll touch on it again before we conclude today. He was president of the St. Louis NAACP from 1938 to 1944. He was president of the board of directors of the Urban League. He was also a member of Mayor Kaufman's interracial committee. He did so much in the area of civil rights for obvious reasons, including the Gaines case. Let's talk about some women. So on March 27, 1943, Margaret Bush was admitted to practice law in Missouri, a member of the second class to graduate from Lincoln University School of Law. She became the second Black woman admitted to practice law in Missouri. As some of you know, Dorothy L. Freeman was the first just a year earlier. Wilson was born in 1919 to James T. and Margaret Casey Bush. Wilson served as an attorney for the Rural Electrification Administration of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In 1944, she married Robert Wilson, a classmate from Lincoln University School of Law. A few years later, she set up her own practice in St. Louis, where she specialized in real estate law. Wilson, along with George Vaughn, played a significant role in Shelley v. Kramer, that 1948 case that declared unconstitutional the judicial enforcement of racial restrictive housing covenants. She actually ran for Congress in 1948, and I found that research interesting. I wonder what she would think of Cori Bush's recent primary victory and the possibility that she could be elected to Congress within the next 2 weeks from the same area. Wilson headed the Missouri NAACP in the 1960s and then served as chairperson of the NAACP National Board of Directors for almost a decade, 1975 to 1984. She also served on the boards of Washington University in St. Louis and Western University, and she was the board chair for St. Augustine College and Talladega, two historically Black colleges. Incidentally, Wilson was chair of the Law Day 2000 for the American Bar Association. So a big giant, and I know a number of you knew her. In 1947, Frankie Freeman graduated second in her class from Howard University School of Law. And despite this high ranking, she was not considered by large white law firms in St. Louis, leading her to open up her own law firm in 1949. Freeman's civil rights work with the NAACP is perhaps most punctuated by her lead representation in the 1954 class action case of Davis et al. V. the St. Louis Housing Authority. That was a landmark decision ending legalized public housing discrimination in St. Louis and thus across the country. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson appointed her to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She was the first woman to serve on the commission, and she was reappointed by Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter. She was a tireless fighter for equality. In 1967, Freeman said, "We are now on a collision course that may produce within our own borders two alienated and unequal nations confronting each other across a widening gulf created by a dual educational system based upon income and race. Our present school crisis is a human crisis, engendered and sustained in large part by the action, the apathy, or the short-sightedness of public officials and private individuals. It can be resolved only by the commitment, the creative energies, and the combined resources of concerned Americans at every level of public and private life." Freeman was named to the National Bar Association's Hall of Fame in 1990, the Civil Rights Walk of Fame in 2007, and the St. Louis Walk of Fame in 2015. I had never heard of Leona Pouncey Thurman until I began this research project, and there are so many lawyers alive today who offered reflections on knowing Ms. Pouncey Thurman. She was the first Black woman to practice law in Kansas City. She was born in Russellville, Arkansas in 1911. She attended Henderson Business College in Memphis before moving to Kansas City in 1931. She became interested in being a lawyer while working as a secretary for attorney James D. Pouncey, whom she married in 1937. Following his death, she enrolled at Howard University School of Law, earning her degree in 1949. Passing the bar, she became the first Black woman to practice in Kansas City. As I mentioned, her office is located in the historic 18th and Vine area in KC, where she primarily focused on criminal cases in her early years before switching her practice to divorce and domestic. Some of you know this image. In 1952, Harold L. Holliday Sr., pictured there, became the first Black graduate of the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Law. He was also the founding member of Freedom, Inc. That's that influential political organization advocating for civil rights in Kansas City that exists today. Notably, Holliday Sr. won a lawsuit against Benton School, later renamed D.A. Holmes School, after it refused to allow Black students to attend. The Harold Holliday Montessori School in Kansas City serves as a reminder of Holliday Sr.'s zealous advocacy for equal rights. After almost 20 years in practice, Holliday Sr. served as a magistrate judge in Kansas City, and then as an associate regional counsel in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He was elected to the Missouri House of Representatives in 1964, and he served the state many years in that capacity. He died in 1985. And I know the Mizzou law folks know that his son, Doc Holliday Jr., was the first to graduate from the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Law in 1968. And Doc Holliday went on to practice law at the Holliday Law Firm for 37 years before he died in 2005. This man needs very little introduction. I think you know that in '49, Judge Ted McMillian graduated first in his class at St. Louis University School of Law. And of course, opportunities at law firms were not open to him. In 1953, he became an assistant circuit attorney. In a series of firsts, McMillian became Missouri's first Black state court judge in 1956, the first Black judge on the Missouri Court of Appeals in 1972, the first Black judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit in 1978. His legacy includes landmark decisions in cases about desegregation, free speech, civil rights, employment discrimination, and affirmative action. And I can see the people on this VTC, and I know some of you knew Judge McMillian quite well, but as far as judges go in our state, we haven't had a finer one. He towered above the rest. So let's get quickly to the era that kind of captures my life. I'm a 1970 kid, 50 years old. So 71 to the day. I think you know at the close of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, Blacks have progressed in the profession here in Missouri and elsewhere. In 1970s and the 1980s, and by the time that we had Barack Obama elected president in 2008, there were more than 40,000 Black lawyers practicing in the United States. And the overwhelming number of those 40,000 practicing in the US matriculated from integrated law schools. And this number, as of last year, was 67,000. Really good progress around the nation, but we're still underrepresented. So in this last portion of the paper, I'm just gonna talk about some of the firsts and then open this up for questions. Pictured here is Peter Mutharika. He became the first Black law professor at Washington University School of Law in 1972, and he attained tenure in 1975 as the first. In 2008, he was named Malawi's chief advisor to the president on constitutional, legal, and international affairs. He retired from Washington University 3 years later in 2011. In 2014, he would become president of Malawi and serve in that position until June 2020. He remains a key political figure in Malawi. You know these two faces. Beginning in the mid-1970s, Blacks began to integrate Missouri's largest majority-owned firms. In 1976, Carol E. Jackson joined St. Louis-based Thompson Mitchell, that's now Thompson Coburn, and Charles Shaw joined the St. Louis law firm of Lashley and Bear, and those two became the first Black lawyers at their firms. Sorry, the picture's a little grainy, but Bill Session of Kansas City is a low-key guy. And in 1978, he became the first Black hired by a large Kansas City law firm. And that law firm is now defunct, called Lindy Thompson. And when it imploded, all of those partners went to all the top law firms on the Kansas City side. He was the first to make partner there in 1981. Everyone in Kansas City acknowledges he was the first. And in fact, he was the 7th Black to graduate from the University of Missouri Columbia School of Law. Here's someone we lost earlier this year, tragically, way too early. But Larry L. Deskins became the first Black attorney in St. Louis to be hired by a majority law firm when he joined Lewis Rice in 1977. He's a graduate of Allegheny College and Washington University School of Law. He became the first African-American partner of any major St. Louis law firm when he was elevated by the firm in 1985 to its partnership, and again served there until just earlier this year. I would love to get some email traffic on if I'm right about this. I do believe Mary E. Nelson was the first Black female to be elevated to partner by a large white law firm when St. Louis's Lashley and Bear promoted her in 1992. And I've heard that from some of you. I have been unable to confirm it with her directly. She was at Lashley from 1987 to 1993 when she became general counsel for the St. Louis Development Corporation. She is a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Missouri Columbia School of Law. Let's talk about the big law firms. Here's the short version. In the state of Missouri, there are roughly 1,143 partners at our top law firms. And I say top, the top 9, the way the Missouri Lawyers Weekly publication prints these numbers every year. Of the 1,143 partners that reside in the state of Missouri, there are 23 Black partners. So exactly 2%. All 23 of those Black partners work at offices either in Kansas City or St. Louis. So there are none in Springfield, and many of our largest firms have offices in Springfield. Many have offices in Jefferson City, where I work, but there are no Black partners in those offices. They're all in Kansas City or St. Louis. And if we're talking 9 firms, generally each of those firms have 1, 2, or 3. I think Thompson Coburn might have the most of any. I think there are 4, maybe 5. If there's a Thompson Coburn lawyer on here, I don't have the paper in front of me, but I think you've got the highest numbers right now. In 1983, Judge Evelyn Marie Baker became the first female circuit court judge. She was the 3rd woman and the 2nd Black to be a judge in St. Louis. She's a 1973 graduate of St. Louis University School of Law. Her career includes working with the National Labor Relations Board, the St. Louis City Circuit Attorney's Office, and the United States Attorney's Office. Here's a neighbor of mine, since I now live in Columbia, Missouri, Michael A. Middleton. He was the first Black professor at the University of Missouri Columbia School of Law. He joined the faculty in 1985 after an amazing career with the federal government in Washington primarily. He earned his undergraduate degree and his law degree at the University of Missouri Columbia in 1968 and 1971, respectively. Beginning in 1997, Professor Middleton served as the interim vice provost for minority affairs and faculty development for the University of Missouri. In 1998, he accepted the position of deputy chancellor. He currently serves as the deputy chancellor emeritus and professor emeritus of law. He has served as interim president of both University of Missouri Columbia system, excuse me, let me rephrase that, the University of Missouri system, so all the campuses throughout the state. He's also has served as the interim president of Lincoln University, and it's my understanding both institutions wanted him to be the permanent, and he, I think, was past that in his career and didn't want that. There is an amazing documentary out there that focuses on his life. It's called Only the Educated Are Free. It premiered in 2019 in downtown Columbia. A number of Mound City Bar members were in the house, including Professor Norwood and her husband, Ron. And I shouldn't drop names because there were just a ton of Mound City folks there. I apologize for forgetting who else was there, but it was a beautiful evening. And that documentary described him as a civil rights activist and attorney, the first Black law professor at Mizzou's law school and a trailblazing administrator at the university. And he's just a first-class guy. For those of you who know him, you know what I mean. So here's walking, breathing, living history, and there's so much of it because unfortunately with our history, we're hitting firsts all the time. In 1991, Judge Sandra Hemphill, pictured left there, became the first Black judge on the St. Louis County Circuit Court, first serving as an associate circuit court judge. After 28 years of service at that level, Governor Jay Nixon elevated her to a circuit judgeship in 2014. Judge Hemphill is a graduate of Spelman College and the University of Florida School of Law. To the right is Judge Gloria Clark Reno. On October 10, 2018, Judge Reno was unanimously elected by her peers to serve as the presiding judge of the St. Louis County Circuit Court, becoming the first Black to lead the 21st Judicial Circuit since it was established in 1815. I think you know she's a graduate of the University of Missouri St. Louis and St. Louis University School of Law. She served as a municipal judge for the city of Northwoods from 1994 to 2002 and was appointed an associate circuit court judge for St. Louis County by Governor Bob Holden in 2002. Governor Jay Nixon appointed her a St. Louis County Circuit Judge in 2009. Last year, Judge Reno and Judge Robin Ransom, then presiding judge for the city of St. Louis, now in the Court of Appeals, they made history as Black women who simultaneously led two of the busiest courthouses in Missouri. And I think we all know who's centered there, our former Mound City Bar Association President, Hope Whitehead. She also is living history, serving as the first Black judicial administrator of the St. Louis County Circuit Court, appointed to that position November 9th, 2019. I haven't spoken to Hope since that appointment. I hope she's enjoying every minute of it. Hope graduated from Fordham University in New York in 1981 and received her JD from Washington University in 1990. Following graduation, she worked at the City of St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office before being appointed by 4 different governors to positions in their administration. So not one governor, not 2, not 3, but 4 governors. Let me give a shout out to Anne Marie Clark. You know, she's a retired St. Louis Family Court Commissioner, and she was the first African-American member of the Missouri Bar Board of Governors, and that was in 1986. She was the first African-American woman to serve on the City of St. Louis the St. Louis Board of Police Commissioners, And I know at the time, both Kansas City and St. Louis had such a board of police commissioners, but she was the first, 1993, and she was the first female president of the commission. She earned her undergraduate degree at Northwest Missouri, now Truman State University in 1970, and a law degree at St. Louis University School of Law in 1973. She's a second generation Black lawyer, and she is also a former Mound City Bar Association president. In 1984, and this is the shout out, she wrote a groundbreaking article for the St. Louis Bar Journal entitled The History of the Black Bar. And I don't know if anyone has read that lately, but it is such an important piece of scholarship. It is the seminal article that Professor J. Clay Smith used in the 90s when putting together his book, Emancipation, which is the history of Black lawyers from 1844 in America to 1944. But when he's talking about St. Louis and he's talking about Missouri in general, a lot of the work that Anne Marie Clark did is cited by J. Clay Smith, who's considered to be the godfather of the historical journey that we Black lawyers have had. So I just want to thank her for her work, because I know my paper includes a ton from the work she did. And I would not have been able to do what I did with respect to that time period if it had not been for her. In 2017, at the annual meeting of the National Bar Association, she was installed as the 47th chair of the Judicial Council. And you can see my former law partner pictured there on the left-hand side, John R. Gray at Shook, Hardy & Bacon, swearing her in. I know we're running out of time, and I do want to get to questions and comments, but before I take any questions, I want you to know that the article does discuss Black-owned law firms in Missouri from 1971 to the present. It's no surprise that the history of Black law firms is not well documented. Compounding the issue, many legal ventures among Black lawyers in the state historically have not been partnerships, it's been associations. It's a part of the paper I'm not as pleased with, just given a lot of our history's been lost, even when you talk to the older lawyers who are still around, who can remember some of these firms. So much is being lost. Paper also discusses the bar associations, both nationally and Missouri, offers telling insights into the status and treatment of Black lawyers. I talk about the role of the ABA, National Bar, the Missouri Bar, BAMSO and Mound City Bar, and that relationship. On the Kansas City side is very similar, KCMBA and Jackson County Bar. I think many of you know that history. Anne-Marie Clark has outlined a good deal of that back in 1984, and I'd like to think that with your help, we're building on a lot of what she put together. Let me open it up for questions, comments. We've got about 15 minutes and I can talk to you for the next 15 minutes. I've got lots of material, and embarrassingly, I say I think the average law review article is roughly 20,000 to 30,000 words. There are law journals that would not print articles greater than 35,000 words. And right now I'm probably at about 78,000 words. And I thank the editors of the Missouri Law Review for allowing this to pretty much take up twice the space it should. But what questions do you have?
Well, thank you so much, Judge Epps. And it's my understanding we are in webinar mode. And so the participants would have to raise their hand. There's an icon, I believe. We're going to check and see if that's in the question and answer section. This is relatively new to me. But of course, we can also read. I don't know if you can see on the screen at all under question and answers, there's something from Justin Meehan, J. Justin Meehan, which says, don't forget the older trial masters like James Bell and civil rights activist lawyers Doris Black, Ray Howard, and Forrest Elliott?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you're just right on point. We touch on a couple of those lawyers, but not all of those lawyers. And so I'm gonna, my email address is willie_epps@mow.uscourts.gov. Please send me what you want, and I can put that back up on the screen too before we end. But Justin, I'd love to get whatever you have on those lawyers. So the paper's already too large. And right now the editors are messing around with the footnotes, and I'm going to get it back in January to finalize everything. It would be printed in probably March. So I still have time to add and further develop, but it needs to be a book. I'm not raising my hand to write it. Anne-Marie did her thing back in '84. I feel like Willie Epps is going to do his thing in 2021. And I hope somebody younger and with a lot more energy writes the book. And if not, maybe I will find the energy to write it. But it needs to be a book. The histories, it's going to be lost. And it's amazing how much we don't know. I mean, you can talk to older lawyers. They were at the events. They sort of remember who was who and who was doing what, but so much has been lost. So this is just an effort to capture some of that, but please send that my way.
Fantastic. And of course, he threw in Judges Fullwood and Lucas too. From Dan.
I know we have a profile on Fullwood. I'm not sure about Lucas. I'll have to go back and look, but we literally profile, I think 75 or so judges. We put together a list of all Black judges ever in the state of Missouri. I think the list is probably 95 to 96% complete. We're not there yet. I'll be happy to circulate it to Jackson County Bar and Mound City again to try to get assistance. And so many of you have given us so many nuggets of information that has been useful. I'm going to probably lean on you again in the coming months to make that list better.
Thank you, Judge. Also from Danielle Carr, she asked, what can you tell us about Judge Scoville Richardson for whom the foundation has a scholarship named after him?
Legendary figure, the first to integrate the Bar Association of Metro St. Louis, later became a federal judge, a hero. He is profiled because this is just a 1 hour talk. And when I did this for BAMSO, it was literally a 20 to 25 minute talk. You can imagine how much quicker I was speaking. He's featured, but is he covered the way he should be? Absolutely not. Are there people who are listening to this video teleconference who are mentioned but not featured? Yes. Should they be featured? Yes. Could books be written about their lives? Yes. That's the heartbreaking part of this.
Judge, right now we don't have any more questions, but I wondered if you could touch briefly on the role of the Black bars and other minority bars.
Well, essentially with BAMSO being formed in 1878 or so, the American Bar excluding us, BAMSO excluding us, what is now BAMSO, it was the St. Louis Bar at the time, but what is now KCMBA excluding us, Mound City Bar and Jackson County Bar was founded as an organization where we could gather a fellowship. Many of those members brought forth our nation's top civil rights cases, many that are mentioned in the paper. I don't know where we would be without Mound City Bar or Jackson County Bar. And I hope that when the paper is published, the law review article is published, members of Mound City like what's written about Mound City. What the hard part, all the past presidents are listed. We're trying to do the same for Jackson County Bar. Unfortunately, Jackson County Bar hasn't kept records as well as Mound City. We have it on our website, who the past presidents were. I know there are some sketchy years. I know there are question marks in our list, but we've got a really healthy list. We're trying to do the same thing in Kansas City with Jackson County Bar. We focus on Mound City Bar leaders who have been president of the National Bar Association. That's an elite club, including Walking Living history of, Mavis and Pam. More recently, am I forgetting somebody more recently too? Those are the two that are standing out, National Bar presidents. With BAMSO, I focus on, the African-Americans who have been president of that organization, much like on the Kansas City side. They've had a couple of Black presidents of KCMBA, but I'm out of room. There's just so much history. Essentially, it will be 150 years of Black lawyers in Missouri next year when the state celebrates its bicentennial. You can't cover every moment, but I did my best. And I did my best with the help of so many people who took time out tonight to get on this video teleconference. I mean, how many times I've called, how often I've emailed, how often I've pestered you, and there's just no way we would be where we are without the help of this collective group. And I'm so grateful. I'm extremely grateful. And I try to acknowledge that in the paper. And I'm going to be really disappointed when there's a name or two I'm going to screw up and not include. And I apologize if I do.
We're sure you'll be forgiven, Judge. Let's see what other questions we have. I apologize. I have to pop them off the screen since we are videoing this. Let's see what else we have going on from Rufus, actually, Tate, I believe. Judge, in more modern times, are there any who argued what might be considered seminal cases before the Supreme Court?
Mr. Tate, that is an excellent question. And that is not one I have explored at all. If anyone is aware of any African-American lawyer who has argued a seminal case before the Supreme Court in the last decade or two, I would love to hear about it and possibly include it. One editorial call that I made, I think many of you know, the only bar that Justice Clarence Thomas is a member of is the Missouri Bar. And you all know the story out of Yale Law. He took a job with Jack Danforth when Jack was the Attorney General of Missouri. And Clarence worked side by side with Danforth and Ashcroft and Bond and all these folks that would go on to be governor or US Senator. Well, to this day, Clarence Thomas is only barred in Missouri. He left the AG's office to go to DC and work for Jack in the US Senate. He came back here and worked for Monsanto as in-house counsel. And then during the Reagan administration, he got elevated to some federal employment, including head of the EEOC, before being a judge on the DC Circuit Court of Appeals for about 9 months, and then the Supreme Court. So he's listed among us as a Black Missouri judge. And I know some probably don't think that is where it should be, but I think he's a Missouri Black judge. I know he's born in Pinpoint, Georgia. I know he spent most of his life in DC now. But again, barred in Missouri, this is about Black lawyers in Missouri. He would not be on the court without people of Missouri.
Thank you. I would like to announce to the participants that we don't have everyone's full name necessarily listed. So can you please email me at vice-president president@moundcitybar.com, so that we can have a correct list for the CLE. And let's move on to the next question. Let's see what else we have. Oh, someone is asking you if you'll present part of your paper to the MCBA Centennial Celebration next year. So you have an invite to come back.
I hope so, and I hope the invite stands once people read the law review article. I think it's going to be interesting and captivating, and when reading it, I really do hope you all think about all the law clerks I'm blessed with, all the interns I'm blessed with, all the friends I have across the state, including many on this video teleconference, who have literally hand-fed me information. And when you couldn't hand-feed it, you sent me to someone who had it. And I haven't even gotten to everyone you have sent me to. So I'd be happy to speak, and I'm obviously a huge fan of this organization.
So from Judge Anne Marie Clark, with the Mound City Bar Centennial approaching January 7th of next year, or actually 2022, it is wonderful to have our history captured. Do you know when the St. Louis Negro Bar Association changed its name to Mound City Bar?
That is a great question. I do not recall if I list the year of transition. And I can almost state affirmatively, if Anne Marie Clark did not document it in 1984 in her article for the St. Louis Bar Journal, I don't think J. Clay Smith came close to touching that issue. I've given zero thought to that issue. The bigger issue is the Kansas City side with Jackson County Bar. And I think some of you know my wife has been head of the Jackson County Bar Foundation for 20 years. She's a founder and has been the only president of the foundation. She was a two-term president over there. So when I came on the scene dating her, I met all the JCBA luminaries, except they can't even truly document when JCBA was founded. And they know about predecessor organizations, but I love the fact that at least Mound City Bar can stake a claim. 1925, is that right? I lose track.
Got it right?
1922, obviously, if we're having a centennial. Yeah, it's 1922.
Yeah,
at least you guys stake claim to that date. Jackson County Bar is just a question mark. So Jackson County Bar right now cannot celebrate its centennial. At least you all can celebrate your centennial. And again, we can debate whether we have enough information out there, enough history to definitively say 1922, but I love the fact that we have some historic records that say that's the case.
Our next question, Nimrod Chapel. Is there a common path to the bench that you've observed in your research?
Great question. My neighbor in mid-Missouri. Look forward to seeing you, I think, tomorrow night, Rod. No, the paths are all different. I think many of us, because of opportunities, have come out of government service. So usually prosecutors' offices. I think, again, because of opportunities, many of us have started at the lower rungs of service, including my judicial colleague on my court, Brian Wimes. You know, his first judicial post was as a drug court commissioner. Many of us have to be commissioners first, associate circuit judges first. You know, Sandra Hemphill, I mean, well, I know I mentioned it, for 18 years as associate level. I mean, she should have been a circuit judge after a year, and she, you know, and I won't bore you with where else I think she should have been, but I think we've had a tougher journey than our white counterparts when it's come to what kind of career we had before taking the bench. And then once we get the judicial slot, what slot do we get? I think that's going to come across in the paper.
And next, let's see here. In the early days, would Black lawyers partner with white lawyers?
Would white lawyers partner with Black lawyers? I saw no evidence of that, zero. Burgess, that second Black lawyer and the first to practice full time, he bragged for the article back in the 1920s that he had plenty of white clients and he was treated fairly by white judges, and he claimed there was no racism. But the reporter did deeper digging and found that, you know, his own sister, who had tickets to the St. Louis Symphony at the time, and for a number of seasons had like fourth row seats. I mean, center seats, four rows back. I mean, prime time, you know, the next season rolls around, she's in the very back row. And Burgess' son goes to deal with it with the St. Louis Symphony. And the manager pretty much just says, you know, I don't know in what kind of colorful language he used, but you just need to be happy you're in the arena, in the theater. And we can't continue to seat you so far close to the stage because whites don't want to sit next to you. And they tried to keep it out of the news and not publicize it. But yeah, there was incredible racism and discrimination, but Burgess put on a really good face for that article. And I think it's worth reading by everyone to just see what it was like for that lawyer who practiced for 50 years in St. Louis.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there an attorney that stood out to you in particular? If so, who and why?
You won't like this answer, but everyone I just talked about tonight, and then at least 30 I haven't discussed at all. We all have these unique journeys. I mean, they're all fascinating. They're all heroes, the men and the women. You can't make it up. The journeys that each of us have had have been just truly amazing. And so I really don't think it's fair to say someone like, oh yeah, Ronnie White, because he was the first on the Supreme Court and he, you know, is the district judge now and he was in the legislature, he worked for him. No, you can't do that. And I'm just picking on Ronnie because I was just thinking I didn't really mention him, I don't think. But, you know, we've just got a lot of giants around and many of us who are not in public life, but private lawyers doing your giants. You're doing stuff that even in 2020, you're doing stuff that some of us have never done in our history. And I hope we've captured some of that in the law review article.
Thank you so much, Judge Epps. So insightful, informative, and inspiring. We really appreciate your time here at MCBA. We just thank you for being part of us and always being with us. And we look forward to hearing from you again really soon.
Okay, thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to the next program.
Absolutely. And if you get a chance, you tune in to our next event, which the Mound City Bar Foundation's holding, and it's going to be a lighter, fun time for our foundation. So those of you who are willing to stay on with us, and we're going to have DJ Stu and Darius Bradford on right now. Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you, Fawn.
Time. I just left the meeting accidentally.